How was lunch? Yeah? Did everybody get lunch? Did everybody get coffee? Yes? Okay, that's important. We have a great afternoon planned for you. This next panel is focusing all about journalism. I do want to tell you one quick thing before we start, because this came up. Don't forget to tweet and post on Instagram and on Facebook. And if you turn your name badge over, on the back you'll see the hashtags, hashtag New Majority, hashtag AABDC. There's also some handles for Instagram, all that good stuff. So please tweet and promote all of this on social media. This next panel will discuss the fourth estate and the challenges journalism and media face amid heightened political tensions and the proliferation of Twitter news. Speaking of, Richard Louis, news anchor for MSNBC and NBC News, will moderate this panel. I'd like to welcome him to the stage as he makes his way up. This panel, he will engage his peers in conversation on how public perceptions about the media have affected practitioners and organizations, as well as the challenges faced by minority journalists working for mainstream media outlets. Please welcome Richard Louis, who will introduce you to his panel.
Thank you so much, Sapna. I appreciate that. How's everybody doing after lunch? Good? I think everybody likes this side of the room. I think the building is kind of tilting this way right now. I don't know. Is it you, John? Did you shower today? Yeah, John's sitting over there by himself on a table. Yeah, it's all right. Table 15, stay away. I'd like to welcome up our fellow panelists on the very topic Sapna was just telling us about. And Derek Dingle, come on up. We also have Ramy, Inocencio, and Tanzina, Vega. Faster, folks. Derek is the Senior Vice President, Chief Content Officer at Black Enterprise. Ramy Inocencio is a correspondent at Bloomberg Television. We have Tanzina Vega, also journalist, also a fellow at the Nation Institute. Got it right? All right. There'll be lots of special effects throughout this conversation. Yeah, give me your special effect, Ramy.
Special effect?
Yeah, that you like to...
Well, I used to be an a cappella, so I could just lay down a beat, I suppose.
Well, just do it. Don't...
Oh, they want it. You don't want it.
Yeah. Well, just do it.
Okay, lay down something.
All right, that's good. That's good. All right, that's... All right. Tanzina next. Tanzina next. All right. All right.
Got some flair there.
That's a little homage to Cardi B.
The best for last year.
Oh, yeah.
There we go. There we go. Now, I don't know if audio can keep my mic up throughout this entire conversation, by the way. Please do not meter me down because I will interface with these wonderful noisemakers here. Well, let's start with this. The very title of our conversation is specifically keeping the spotlight on gender and racial representation. Who wants to start? What does that mean?
Which spotlight?
Yeah, you decide.
I think that's the question.
So, right, and by the way, my friends, you know how this works because we're all in this same space. I like fast answers, and I will interrupt you, and feel free to interrupt each other. Okay?
Okay.
Go ahead, Tanzina, you started us. Go ahead. Keeping the spotlight.
Which spotlight? I mean, I think gender is obviously in the spotlight right now, right? Gender and what it means to be a woman, and I think we have to keep the spotlight on these conversations, but we need to make them, I'm going to use an academic term, intersectional, right? That's what we're missing. Mm-hmm. It's not just about women, it's not just about people of color, it's people who live at the intersections of all of these different identities. That's where we as news makers and media folks have to get better.
Storytellers.
And to buttress that point, we need to make sure that the news does not present any race, any gender, as a monolith. There are different stories. There are different segments of society. And because you don't have enough diversity in the newsroom, you do get these monolithic, stories, these, portrayals of African American, Asian American, Latinos that are, one note and lack depth.
Off of that, I want to say that from my purview at Bloomberg Television, looking at the numbers, looking at the data, a lot of that can be easily colorblind or gender blind when we say this, the numbers are up, the numbers are down. Looking at it from the internal perspective as the global co-lead for Bloomberg's Pan-Asian Community, or BPAC, it's looking at advocates and allies, not just within our community group, not within just the Asian American community group, as we were talking just now, but also finding allies across D&I. One thing that I'm trying to push is to find that handshake across to the Latino community, to the LGBT community, to the military vet community, internal to have that conversation and to find the heads at our organization that will push that.
Why is it important to have faces of different places in media?
We have to represent the country that we live in, and right now the media that we have is not representative of the country that we live in, and all of the stories that are being told. And so to take it off of people of color and look at other narratives that came out of the news cycle this year, there was a big concern that news media did not cover the white working class efficiently, right, and enough. Mm-hmm. And so newsrooms said, oh my God, there's a segment of the country that we haven't paid attention to. Let's flood the zone and send reporters out there to make sure we're getting and understanding this community. Fair enough. We haven't done the same with communities of color.
Well, that's the reason why you need a black enterprise, so that you can get a clear representation of actually African Americans in business, careers, across the board. It's our publication that shares with you the innovators in the African American community, in tech community. In Silicon Valley, whether they're executives, whether they're entrepreneurs. It's our publication that puts a spotlight on the fact that there's not enough African American representation on corporate boards, which drives the reason why we have lack of representation across the board, but that also includes the media as well.
How many storytellers do you employ, my friend?
I employ, actually we employ with freelancers, 30 odd. Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah, but I will
all
tell
across
you,
the country, right?
All across the country. I will tell you what has been a challenge over the last decade has been the digital disruption. It has reduced the number of issues that we produce, and the focus is now on online news. Mm-hmm. And with online news, you have to have a speed factor. You have to operate real time, which also creates challenges in that representation as well.
Ramy, did you get your job because you look like that?
I think in part, yeah. No, that was supposed to be a joke, but that was really bad, I guess. No, actually, to be honest, I got my job through the Asian American Journalists Association in a way. The AAJA is a nonprofit group centered in San Francisco that has about 1,500 members on a rolling basis. I'm the national vice president for that, for journalism programs, and I was suggested to meet up with some people at a career fair. I wasn't looking for a gig at the time. I was over in Hong Kong working at the Wall Street Journal, very happy in Asia. Someone who I met at Bloomberg said, oh, great, let's have another coffee. And you're going to be back the second day? Let's have another coffee. And then one thing just snowballed into the next. I think that it probably played a part, to be honest. There were no Asian American males on Bloomberg Television until I joined. Right now, I'm the only Asian American male on Bloomberg Television in the world, dedicated there. Thank you.
Woohoo!
I say that as a double-edged sword. One,
all right.
It's sort of cool to say that, right? Yeah. Two, why the hell am I the only person on there?
Yeah.
Right?
I have no idea what that's like.
By the way, Richard is a pioneer. Richard and I have known each other for what now? Since 2005, 2004?
Yeah, 1984.
He's cutting down the grass, and I'm just following right behind him.
Hardly.
But looking at that, there is an aspect to the minority thing, but it is also about talent. If you don't know what you're talking about, if you can't convey yourself properly, they're not going to look at you. If you're just a pretty face, that might get you to a degree farther ahead. It might not get you all the way. But with that said, we were talking about pretty faces just now. Before, we were having our own little panel before we were chatting.
You're having a pretty face panel on the sides we were having?
And talking about people on television, there are organizations, many of the organizations that we see out there.
Right.
When you turn on the TV, I'll be honest. Do you want to see a pretty person? Do you want to see a handsome person? Or do you want to see a fat, ugly person? You don't have to answer, but just think about that.
Well,
you know what the answer is. And so when people look at that, there is something that leans towards that. But oftentimes, where is there the content? Are those people qualified? They might be pretty, but where's the intelligence in their head? I want to have you pick up on that specifically.
Yeah, that was not 30 seconds, Ramy.
No. I've also had only coffee today,
yeah,
so.
Tanzina, will you ever pick up on that? But also, will you ever? Do you think you're hired because you look like that?
Definitely not. I started my career in the very unsexy world of technology trade magazines. So yeah, my looks had nothing to do with that. And scraped my way out of there into a clerkship, i.e. assistant, do whatever Gal Friday at the New York Times, worked my way up there. And at some point, I think the convergence of the fact that I had a master's degree, that I spoke 2 languages, that I traveled the world, that all these things had happened. And I also and I say this a lot, I grew up in a very poor neighborhood. I grew up not far from here in Lower Manhattan in public housing and went to public school my whole life. And so I think that those things are important because when we talk about diversity, we often forget class diversity in the conversation. Particularly, I've worked at the New York Times and I've worked at CNN. These things matter. I do not let go of any of these identities because they influence the work that we do. They influence the sensibilities that we have towards the people that we're interviewing.
Right.
I grew up in the Lower East Side. Outside, before the big wave of gentrification, outside of Queens, probably one of the most diverse places in the United States. So my lived experience includes, Black, brown, and Asian Americans, primarily. And so that lived experience is something that you can't, just create. You have to have had it in order to understand how to deal, I think, with different types of communities and have a sensibility to do that. So hopefully, I think that's what I brought to my work. Do I look bad on camera? I hope not.
That's not what I'm talking about, though. No, you look great. It's just, but because of the way you look and all the things that come with it, have you ever felt?
I've definitely felt like the only, because I have been the only. I've been the only woman, I've been the only person of color, I've been the only Latina in certain instances, the only person that didn't go to certain schools. So I know what that feels like. I know what it feels like to be a pioneer in a lot of areas. I chose to do the work that I chose to do at the Times and at CNN, focused on race and inequality. Frankly, if what I look like is an asset, why not? I mean, I think we see, particularly when we see people, when this is televised media and digital media, we tend to see a lot of the same faces. I think I was hoping that digital media would really be a place where we would see more diversity. And I think we see that now. But with the big networks, as you guys know, we're still seeing a severe lack of diversity across the board, right, on a lot of the big networks. So I think if what I look like, meaning that I don't look like a, white, American, then great. If that helps, why not? We need more people to look different on camera.
Derek, supply or demand problem?
It's an access problem.
No, golly, I didn't say. Okay, no.
It's, it's being able to, break a barrier in which it's clubby. And I'll give you an example. When I was in college in 1980, the emphasis was on diversifying the media industry, and it was called Deadline 2000. And by 2000, we were going to have newsrooms that looked like America. Now it's Deadline 2025. You have a situation, and this is according to an American Society of Newspaper Editor report, that 17% of minorities are in newsrooms, and people of color make up close to 40% of this country. When you break it down by race, a little more than 5% African American, a little more than 5% Latino, and a little more than 4% Asian. They're not getting access because you don't have African Americans in management, pure and simple. If you have management and there's a commitment to diversifying, and they need to diversify,
Right.
one, for stories,
Yeah.
two, to connect with the communities in which they serve,
Yeah.
three, to generate revenues, four, in terms of, online, the earliest adopters are minorities, and in technology, the earliest adopters are minority for innovation. You have to fix the access problem, because the management of the newsrooms, the ownership of media still looks like 1980.
Can I interject here? Derek, just now when we were talking about this, access, sure, the gate needs to come open, but what kind of qualities does a person of color need to have in order to break through that, right? I mean, we are asking this all the time. How do you break that, whatever it is, old boys club or whatever, to get through? I mean, I was told, or I read last year that, as an Asian American in the media, while most everyone else, or if you're a Caucasian man, let's say, you can do 100% and you'll get there. As an Asian man, you need to do 200% and you might get there. What do you think?
That's still the equation. That's still the equation for people of color. However, the difference in 1980, I got to the Wall Street Journal for an internship through the Dow Jones Newspaper Fund. There were programs put in place to ensure that we meet that deadline 2000. A lot of those programs have gone away. When I started at Black Enterprise, I went to a American Society of Magazine Editors meeting. And that room, about 3 or 4 African American, 2 or 3 Asian American, 1 Latino, that room still looks the same. And the top editors and the composition of top editors is still the same. And this is and the media is so valuable because we're shining a light on the country. What got me into media is the fact that, in a way you're an advocate, or at least you are a truth teller. And if you don't reflect the communities in which you serve, you can't give a complete picture. And that's the problem.
I also want to add something to that, off of that. I think that I talk about this a lot. Anybody who follows me on Twitter knows I tweet about this a lot, the lack of diversity. We need to also make sure that when we hire journalists, editors, and reporters of color, we're not just putting them in metro, i.e. urban beats, or quote-unquote race beats. I've been a business reporter. I was a tech reporter.
You mean sending me to Chinatown to do the Chinatown story?
Correct. It's if you want to go to Chinatown to do the Chinatown story because you're interested in it, that should be why you're sent, not because you can't
Chinatown.
cover anything else, right?
Yeah.
And I think when you look at business reporters, you look at DC, you look at investigative beats, I have the numbers. The flip to ASNI numbers are that 83% of newsrooms are white.
Yep.
The flip to your Pulitzer numbers are that 84% of Pulitzers over the past 100 years have been won by whites. That tells us that there is not just a pipeline issue when it comes to management, there's a pipeline issue when it comes to what I call assignment equity, right? The communities of color and the journalists of color in your newsroom should be given the anchor desks. They should be given, they should pass the
Executive producers.
Executive producers, investigative beats. Who's breaking the news, right? Who's the person you're waking up to on that White House beat?
Yeah.
That's where we also have to penetrate,
Really
not
good
just
points.
in beats that we already know.
Really good points to any of you, Ramy included. When each and every one of you walk into a newsroom and you see another person of color, do you go, oh, well, then I'm not going to get that because we're all fighting for the same slice, therefore not working together?
I think that happens.
Yeah.
I think when I see a person of color, my reaction is, oh my God, wait, come here.
So it's
let's
like,
have
come
lunch.
here.
Yes, that's
Yes,
actually how I feel too.
It's kind of like
gravitate.
we want to sort of bring and gravitate and connect. And I've done a ton of mentoring of particularly young women of color who reach out to me on Twitter a lot. And I've had women of color I've had hired at different organizations. I extend myself to do that. What I'm noticing is that we have a real issue with fear in communities of color. And I think we need to talk about that, about feeling like if I extend myself to you or give you an opportunity, that's one less opportunity for me.
Right.
And until we begin to examine the structures,
Right.
we're not going to get anywhere.
Ramy?
Yeah, I don't discount what you said in terms of competition, but
Sure.
at least for me, if I see someone who is similar age, Asian American male, I think first, one, cool, someone I could speak to, identify with on a cultural level at least, but also if that person is better than me, fine. That means I have to raise my bar even higher.
So you don't feel like, oh, okay,
I personally
there's
don't.
only one seat on that table, like where John. Oh, no, John, you got more people on your table now. There's only one seat on that table for somebody that is like me.
Yeah,
Uh-oh.
I think that's how management plays it. And I think that's where we need to be careful.
But I'm talking about us as practitioners.
Right.
That I don't want to go there yet, but you felt somewhat that way before, is what you're saying,
I
to a degree.
No. If I were going to feel anything, it'd be I have to raise my bar.
Got it.
Not oh crap. That I feel one, I want to go towards them, include them in the community that I'm in, and then move on from there.
When I was at Money Magazine, I saw it as my obligation to bring more people of color in, and I did. I saw it as my obligation to have more people of color at Money.
Yeah.
And after a while, they came. They would come to me and say, "Well, Derek, do you know other African American entrepreneurs, couples, what have you?" I said, "I know plenty." I said, I could make the entire Money Magazine African American. I did at Black Enterprise. But I think it's important to play that. And I play that mentorship role now. I make recommendations. I have contacts
Across different groups, across our Latino American brothers and sisters, our Asian American brothers and sisters, you're doing.
I would admittedly
American?
it's more with African Americans who I've mentored at Black Enterprise. Mm-hmm. But what's interesting is that a few years back, there used to be unity conferences. It was the National Association of Black Journalists, Asian Association of Journalists, and the
Native
American and National Association of Hispanic Journalists. For some reason, that disbanded. And I think we need to take a chapter from the new majority and bring those groups together.
All right, amen.
Because from
right.
that, I got to know more Latino, Asian American, and Native American journalists.
It was called the Unity Conference, and it was the largest gathering of journalists, regardless of how you looked or where you're from, in the country every 4 years. It was always during an election cycle. We always had the presidential nominees there talking to us each and every 4 years. It was a really great gathering. But so what you're saying is we need more of that still.
You need more of that still, because then you gained a real balanced view of coverage too, because you had the presidential candidates coming in, you had other newsmakers coming in,
right?
And actually, it was fascinating and also educational to see the different cultures ask different types of questions.
Sure.
Because that's what it's about.
And go to different parties
learning.
too.
It's
Go to
about
different parties.
yeah. And it's about having different stories. Also, it's not a monolith. Black Enterprise had Sid Wilson on the cover because we did a piece on Afro-Latinos. So there,
right.
So we have to look beyond just cookie cutter approaches to coverage, because there is a mosaic out there that represents this country that doesn't get covered if you don't bring everyone under the tent.
So let me ask this question to all of y'all. When's the last time that you have done a whether your background is a your background event with another fellow person of color event? So if you are Latino American, when's the last time you went to an Asian American event? If you're African American, when's the last time you went to a Latino? That sort of thing. Just one answer quickly, please. Today. Great. Okay. All right. All right. Okay. All right.
That was a good card.
Right.
I'm thinking of intersectionality here. That's the word that comes to mind. Being an Asian American, but also being a member of the LGBT community. The last thing that I did was for World AIDS Day, December 1st.
Right.
I posted something there.
Great.
I did the actually new majority, But
You
also,
could say today too.
yeah, I say today too. But I can also say that there was the National Minority Supplier Development Council.
There you go. Me at Silicon Harlem, right up the block. Great event. So the reason why I was going down that road is for many of our ERG, BRG friends in this room, you kind of asked those questions at some point in your background, in your career, in your arc, where you walked into the room and you went, oh, there's another one. Oh, I do want to talk to them, but that sort of, and I went through that when I was in business early on in my career. It's like, oh, there's another Asian American male there. And that person is trying to be very much mainstream. Is he denying his background here? Is he denying who he is? That was something I went through early in my career because who would be the most mainstream in that boardroom, in that business meeting and what have you. That's why I was trying to draw the parallel. So now I'm still going to draw another parallel, and that is you all have to then therefore craft your story when you're in these newsrooms, in these environments. Tell me, what is your 2-sentence storyline that you always are trying to drive towards? Like, this is who you are, based on all that we've talked about. Because you are trying to, this is who I am, and this is what I want to be, and share that with me, because it's what every leader in here must and does do.
I mean, I always, enter it from, first of all, I'm a native New Yorker, which is rare.
Remember 2 sentences.
Born and raised. Native New Yorker, multi-platform storyteller, Latina, and, I can pretty much do it all. So.
Don't look at the package because there's a lot of surprises in it.
That's deep. I don't know what to say after that. You caught me off guard. I'm going to go more traditional, unfortunately. Sorry.
I just wanted to say something mind-blowing.
Looking through my lens, Asian American, trying to give a voice to Asian Americans over at Bloomberg, and also to let someone who's watching around the world say, oh, there's someone who looks like me. I can speak to them. They know my culture. They know a little bit of my background. There's some credibility there.
That's deep.
Not as deep as that.
They're all deep.
Someone tweet that one out.
Yeah. So any questions? You can just raise your hand as we're talking. I'm going to do one more question with these folks, but then I'm going to come out to you. And Tihua's already got a question. Please. So Tihua, tell folks, first of all, your experience in journalism.
My name is Tihua Chang. I'm a longtime reporter in New York City.
Yep.
And I'm unemployed. So, so anytime, Ramy, I'll send you my resume. So I have a question for the panel and for the audience here. It's kind of long, so I'll try and make it short. I believe a free press is a foundation to democracy. And since democracy and the press is under attack, I think it's important for all of us to support a free press. When you go to when I went to my journalism reunion at Columbia J School, the one sentence that was repeated almost at every panel was, "Does this make money? Will it survive?" Because the business of journalism is so bad now for a number of reasons, because of the internet, whatever, and the attacks, the Russians, the fake media, the social media. So my question comes down to this: how can corporations, and should corporations, support a free media? For example, is it possible for the companies to go back and say, let's buy subscriptions for our employees to nonpartisan journalism? And is it good for journalists to ask corporations whom we may cover, for example, to do that? Is it important enough now to keep a free press? And I might point out that Thomas Jefferson, he was a slave owner, did have some things to say about that I think were valid about journalism. He said, were it left up to me, this during the framing of the Constitution, to have a government without newspapers or newspapers without government, I would not hesitate a second to choose the latter. So my question is, how can corporations support a free press in this country?
There's a lot of questions in that, T. And that was one of them. Before we get to that, let's get straight to it. Should corporations, all of our programs are sponsored by corporations. Yeah. Should they take a step farther forward than that?
I mean, my gut as a journalist, if they want to help, for the state and to push this out, yes. But there is a lot of conflict in there as well, and someone's going to say, you know what, why support that versus someone else? But my gut says yes.
I also think we need to think about, I give a lot of talks at universities, and I was at one a couple months ago, and I asked the room, how many of you have a Netflix subscription? Most people raised their hand. I said, how many of you have a subscription to the New York Times? And many hands went down. And so there's an issue in terms of how we pay for media, how we consume media, and the fact that it's not cheap. And I think we've gotten used to, a lot of us that work in corporate media, our sponsors, our advertisers, they're critical to I used to cover this industry. Advertising dollars are critical to helping us stay afloat. At the same time, we've lost a focus on the responsibility of the news consumer. And that's what I tell people. You have a voice in what you choose to click on, what you choose to support. The Times is now really touting their subscriber numbers. Now, can everyone do that? Probably not, right? But is it important and incumbent upon us
Washington
as
Post.
consumers? Washington Post can do it. But as consumers, we also need to
Right.
speak with our clicks and our dollars, to see the media we want.
And on that note, I think as consumers of news, all of us, including here on the dais, would we need to spend the same amount of time that we do buying a new phone in terms of determining our sources.
Absolutely.
That's the one thing we need to do. Just spend. I mean, we spend how much time when we're buying a pair of shoes? Well, that's where I'm going to get my news from after I do the same amount of time.
Yeah, I see that if you see value in the publication and
Yeah.
what we're presenting, you should support it. If you're an executive and you have the ability to influence advertising, then you should step up, because for Black Enterprise, we present a mission of, not only presenting stories of diversity and wealth building, but we have an advocacy role. We have advocacy role that ensures that there's going to be a next generation of executives. We have an advocacy role that we will cover events like the event today, because it needs to be told. At the same time, for our business model, and we know that advertising has been shrinking, we develop multiple platforms. And I must say that our CEO, Earl Butch Graves Jr., he was prescient. He created an events business before it became, the thing to do. Yeah. We started digital in '96. We have 2 television shows. So those revenues support what we do with the magazine.
Sure.
So they're interdependent.
They help each other.
Yeah, because you can't rely on
Yeah.
whether a corporation's going to stand up or not, but you can provide a menu of options that present value. But at the core is our mission to drive entrepreneurship, career success, and wealth building for African Americans. And we found early on, especially with the Great Recession, that we had to change the model.
What's your response to all three of you to this move within the last, I think, 2 days or so? The attacks on media? More than 2 days, obviously. 2 years. With the attacks on media, if I don't like it, I'm going to call it just not real news. And there is some stuff that isn't real, certainly. But then there's also attack on that which is real news. And what all three of you do, quickly, in 30 seconds, answer how you react to that and how you try to get people to the right place when that idea of fake news is brought up from the very highest places of power.
My first thought, at least at Bloomberg, is that we haven't actually been called #fake news yet. I think one good thing is that because we do rely on the numbers that we do push out on the Bloomberg terminal, that's one good thing. I think I'm sort of waiting to be called fake news at some point. But I think reliance on the numbers helps to get around that at least.
I just left CNN, and yes, we were called fake news. So I
Never.
know what that feels like. I think, but my pieces often aren't. And so I think a lot of that is because I steep everything in data. Even when I do commentary about race, it's data, it's numbers, it's backed up by fact. And even in those instances, I will have people say to me, I disagree with you. And I'm like, that's fine, but that's the number.
I think you have to continue to have the message of your credibility. When a number of publications and media companies decided to discard fact-checking, we kept it. We made the investment, and we said it's important to communicate before the fake news nonsense.
Oh, you said it.
Yeah,
All
before
right.
the fake news nonsense, because some of that is political deflection.
Right.
Pure and simple. We thought that it was important to make sure that all the facts that are in Black Enterprise are accurate, and it goes through 3 to 4 fact checkers.
Is the state of journalism, this includes the issues of justice, racial justice, as has been written here, racial equality, equity in gender equality, when you look at women represented in different places of our great country. What is the state of journalism based on these attacks, not only from the White House, but from other places? Would you say it's great, it's okay, or it's, just give me your, actually don't say anything, just with your hands go, it's better than before, it's the same, or it's worse? Ready? All right, I'll give you 5 seconds to think, and then you got a free hand there. Ready? 1, 2, 3.
I think it's right here.
I'm the only optimist here.
You said you're talking about public perception, right?
No, where it actually is based on, because you're practitioners.
Yep.
What is the actual state of journalism now after all of these attacks?
I hope in my opinion.
I say it's different for different organizations. Like for the New York Times, for example, and I am a subscriber.
Okay.
Yep.
You know, I see that has been galvanized by fake news accusations. People who want to gravitate to that will subscribe, will go and read more. But the people who don't will want to go someplace else. The antithesis of the New York Times, whatever you think that might be. I didn't say it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Any other reactions
Yeah.
there?
Yeah,
Quickly.
the credibility of journalism has been, questioned over the last, last decade. There's, the public trust factor, has dropped. You gotta admit that. It's our job to build it up with quality and credibility, and to communicate, the value of what we're presenting to the public at large.
I think it's better because as I talk with different folks in different places and different platforms in different cities, states, and countries, all journalists, I think, are remembering the beauty that this country has in the Fourth Estate, that we have this miraculous ability to talk about free speech, to use free speech, and therefore it is emblazoned in our Constitution, is emblazoned in our free economy, free speech, free open economy, free economy, that there's an equivalent there. And when we speak with journalists, whether they be at the Washington Post or in Albania, where I was 2 months ago, or in Davos, where I was last week, or in a small town where you're talking and you get asked this question all the time, I think that journalists know they have a special obligation because it is the Fourth Estate. That's why I put my thumbs up, because everybody is saying, oh no, I'm not being set back by this. I'm going to work harder. I'm going to do better. I'm going to get it more right. I know that's not a word. But I'm going to make it more right than it was, righter than it was before. So that's why my thumb is up.
At the same time, and I agree with the same mission orientation that most journalists have, that we have to, provide news and to inform the public, and also to change society. I think what is challenged now, and I see this often because I have conversations with young journalists, is getting in the door. Being able to participate, and it's tougher.
It's the way we started. We definitely have the opportunity to improve access. Definitely have an opportunity to improve supply. We definitely have an opportunity to increase demand as well. All right, I want to get into another question. Anybody else have about another 15 minutes, I think. You can also be critical if you don't want to have a question.
We're used to it.
Yes, we're used to it.
Hello, my name is John Sutter. I'm with the Conference Board. I have a question. I've been following this story pretty closely. Jamel Hill from ESPN was recently moved to a different show, and she expressed her opinions about President Trump last summer, I believe, after her slow response to Charlottesville. What is your sort of reaction to that, and what do you as being a minority reporter, as she is a minority reporter, she might have been disproportionately sort of.
And she's a woman, yeah.
She's a
So she actually issued a statement. I've been following this pretty closely. She actually issued a statement a couple days ago saying that she was not demoted, that this was a decision that she made along with the editor of The Undefeated, who's Kevin Merida, who has a long track record. Not just, he himself is a black editor, but also, having The Undefeated under his belt. So this sounded from her that it was more of a decision that they made to sort of give her a different platform than the one that she had on TV. And I think the bigger question I think you might be asking is, was it fair to have the reaction to her comments when we've had other journalists, or commentators sort of speak out, against the president? And I think the bigger question there is the media really dropped the ball. That's why my thumb was sort of in the middle towards down. We dropped the ball largely in terms of how we covered this election. I'm not going to put myself in that pile because, frankly, I covered race the entire time. But I think the media generally dropped the ball with, this false equivalency of what's considered racist and what isn't. And now we're at this turning point where journalists are saying, oh, wait, this is racist, all right? And we can say that now. And what I would reflect back, and I've actually tweeted this, is, it's great that we're having this moment of reflection about what is and isn't racist. I hope that that moment of reflection impacts the actual newsrooms as well, and not just the pundits who are able to say this more freely.
I think it's going to drive the conversation on commentary, and I think that journalists, especially those who provide commentary, it should be a level playing field, And the criticism to the president, you talked about the fourth estate. That's the job of the fourth estate, to keep power in check.
That's
to
right.
make comments.
Mm-hmm.
So she was doing her job, and we need we talked a lot about leadership and about courage. That's what we need. We need courageous leadership that's going to protect the fourth estate, because if we don't, then we're not going to have a vehicle that's going to maintain our freedoms.
And I agree, and that's, again, when my thumb was sort of middle to down, because I think that we didn't have that.
Yeah.
Frankly, in this last year of coverage, we didn't have it.
What we do here in this country is also, we need to be aware, there were, I believe last year, was it 48 journalists that died last year. None of them were Americans. But I know all of them were looking at Americans and what we do as journalists. And so that's why when I say it's an important job, and when people get up every day as journalists, it's because there's a whole bunch of folks standing up for free speech in all these places and corners, and that what we do, and I know sometimes it feels like it's just our own space or telling stories, there are a lot of people that care about what we're doing, because it means to them life and death, and it means for them a new country, a young country, potentially a new democracy. And so that's why I remain hopeful of our profession. And I like all that we have different perspectives on this panel about where we are in terms of the state of journalism, because it includes all of this thing, all this stew, this burrito that we've been talking about in storytelling. Did you have any other questions out here? We'll do these three, and then they can just reflect.
Hey. Oh, okay.
Go. Yeah, man.
Yeah, all right, fantastic. Damian Rivera with Accenture. I think everything that's been talked about, this panel, all of them have been fantastic. Tanzina, you may have mentioned fear, and I'm curious about your guys' thoughts when it comes to the media and things that are said. I grew up in Spanish Harlem projects, all that sort of stuff. My parents always put a view of a world of abundance, right? And that took away a lot of the fear that I had in walking out in the streets. I'd be okay. My dad always made sure I was going to be okay. There's a lot of fear that comes out from a media perspective that I hear. My kids here, I have a 16-year-old son, 14-year-old daughter. I'm curious your guys' thoughts on the role that the media plays in terms of whether it's a subtle undertone of fear or an overtone of it, and how that actually further creates people to divide.
Playing on fear.
Yeah.
Okay, good question. Back there?
Karthik Ramakrishnan. I'll be one of the speakers tomorrow. But one of the things I during lunch I noted was there seems to be a disconnect between the logic in Washington, D.C., which seems either hostile or completely ignores the multicultural agenda, for lack of a better word, diversity agenda, however you want to phrase it, and corporate America, which is what we see today in so many other instances, still very committed in seeing that this is the new normal, right? But I think media seems to be in a very precarious position on that, because it seems like the dominant story last year, and I just hate to be blunt about it, was to figure out white people. That was the dominant media narrative of 2017. You would think that with Alabama, with a lot of people of color, women of color running for office, that the media story for 2018 will get back to this diversity agenda. But I'm not sure what your thoughts are. I mean, if you had to predict what the dominant media narrative will be in 2018, will people of color be part of that?
Hi, Cheng Zhu with the Minority Business Development Agency, Manhattan Business Center. We are a federally funded program by the U.S. Department of Commerce, and we help minority-owned businesses gain greater access to capital, contracts, and markets. So just want to follow up on your previous very profound philosophical advice about don't look at the package. Now you see we all just had lunch, so it's still processing the philosophical advice. So what would be your advice about what should we say to those people who are still insisting on looking at the package? How do we deal with those hidden bias, sometimes unconscious bias that's natural to all human beings, and what should we do, and also what kind of role the media can play in dealing with that unconscious bias?
Okay, panel, 30 seconds to react to any of those. Each.
I'll take
Don't go longer, please, in 30 seconds.
Unconscious bias. I think one of the things is, in terms of coverage, it's up to reporters to go beyond traditional narratives. Specific to the Asian American community, 2 stories I did about this community were some of the most popular I've ever done, and I think it's because they pushed a different narrative. Most recently for CNN, there was a conversation happening in The Economist and in the New York Times about the model minority and the money that Asian Americans make, et cetera, and I said, well, wait a minute, and actually called Karthik and some other folks and said, we need to break down the numbers of Asian American wealth. And so when I did that, it presented a completely different picture of where the pockets of Asian American wealth are and where the pockets of Asian American poverty are. And that changes the conversation. That helps to break the stereotype, right? But that's one story. We need to do more.
I'm going to talk about the package since I brought the package up. The reason why I said that is because it's very easy to stereotype, entrepreneurs. And if you want to break barriers, if you want to break impressions, give them an issue of Black enterprise and see the diversity of entrepreneurs that are in there, the scientists, the neurologists, people who are doing amazing things in their community. Everyone from the ex-con who decided to start a business to a young man who got 14 job offers in Silicon Valley because he was in one of our hackathons. So I think if you see that diversity of images in terms of African Americans, you can't create a one note on African American success and entrepreneurship.
On the second question regarding what the theme may be for 2018, I'm looking at this through the lens of who has won the most over the past year, politically, economically, and those who have lost the most. Just my personal thought. And who is motivated off of whether they've won more and they want to keep it, or that they've lost more and want to keep it. I think the motivation for where we all are today might be the latter, where we have lost and what we can regain again. I think through the political lens, and saying, I think you had said, trying to get into the head of the white guy, is that what you said? Right, okay, so with my colleagues at Bloomberg and just friends who are journalists, we've said, okay, so let's look ahead to 2020. Who would be the best presidential candidate? I know it's early days yet. If you are a Democrat, a lot of my friends are Democrats, I'll say that. They've said, you know what, as much as I wish it were a Black person, a Latino person, an Asian person. I would love that. Probably at the top of the ticket, you know what we really need right now? A white guy. Because the minority, the new minority that we're trying to pull together here, wasn't enough for Hillary Clinton to win. That's what we're seeing here, at least. Or on that realm of fear, where people were so fearful of what happened during the Obama administration that the pendulum swung so far, swung so far to the left. But now it needs to pull back. And the minority that we all have together today, as much as I wish that it were as strong as we want it to be, that we still need not just us to talk amongst ourselves, but to have people who are also white, Caucasian, across the country to be part of this coalition.
Fear. That does happen. We need more experienced journalists telling stories. Obamacare came out. NBC was the only network to get it right. Why? Because we had Pete Williams standing in front of the Supreme Court, who has been telling stories for 40 years, and he waited to get it right. Fear, when you have good, experienced journalists, they're going to go for the facts first. 400 women are running for Congress. That's the storyline in 2018. That's the micro to the macro to the micro. I think that's 4 times any previous record. 400. 369. But I'm rounding up. Package. Make a list of 3 people you never talk to and talk to them. 3 people you never have lunch with. Go have lunch with them. You will start that slow march, that slow muscle build-up where you'll be able to do it. And the package will just whittle away, just fall away. Any other questions?
2 years ago, the CEO of Sam's Club was interviewed on air, and the question was about their diversity within the organization. And the answer was,
Let's give you a microphone, Ron. I know you like to be heard. Hey. We know each other, so it's, yeah.
Ron Busby, U.S. Black Chambers, Inc. A couple years ago, the president and CEO of Sam's Club was asked on an interview about their diversity inclusion at her company. And her answer was, earlier today, I was having an interview with a potential supplier, and I asked them about their diversity. It was a table of 4 white men. And in return, white men boycotted Sam's Club and eventually cost her her job. The question is, when we're talking about diversity and inclusion, especially with the media, many folk have to be careful about their answers. And sometimes we don't get the truth because we're trying to make sure that we're either protecting our companies or our careers. How do we be truthful while is also telling the story that needs to be heard by America?
So there's a study.
I'm going to get 2 more questions.
Oh, sorry.
All right, so there's one over here. I think I saw a hand over here. Sure. There it is. Right here, please. And since you're close to a mic, and then, sir, grab that mic. You're up next. Go ahead. Woo!
Oh, sorry. Sandra Smith, Microsoft. So earlier we had politicians up here, and they talked about how...
Who do you like better, by the way, politicians or journalists?
You're better storytellers. So my question is...
Wow, no answer. No answer.
It's not an answer.
No answer there.
That was an answer. That was an answer. That was an answer. That was an answer. Go.
Do you think that given the small minority of especially Asians in politics or in journalism, that there's a cultural aspect to how careers get chosen and, you know, why there's so few in those arenas?
Got it.
Damon Williams, Executive Leadership Council, to the panel. Key question, as we look at overseas and what's happening overseas, the good and the bad, the fact that we have such a lack of diversity hurts in telling those stories. How do we get media, the upper echelon of media management to understand you need to have that diversity to cover those types of stories? And what do we do to make that happen?
All right. To our panel.
So to
30
the
seconds
first
again,
question,
please.
there was a Harvard Business Review study that actually showed that people of color and women who advocate for diversity are penalized. So this is not something that's easy to do. They're penalized the higher up they are. And I know because I am one of those people, right? I tweet about diversity, I write about diversity, but that's because it was my job. What I can say, and I think a lot of people in this room should probably be really honest with themselves, if not openly with the rest of us here, we have to get better. We as women, as communities of color, but even as allies who aren't in these spaces, at really creating these pipelines. There's a sense, to jump off of what Richard was saying earlier, do you feel like you're the only one? Is it just you? As people who have often been so few in number in these positions, we're so afraid to often bring the next person up, and there are many words for that. We're not going to get into that. But we have to get past that, because that's how power is created, and that's how power is sustained. And so if we don't understand the dynamics of power and the way structural power is created and sustained, we're never going to get a piece of that.
To your second question about Asian Americans, at least in politics, I think there was a report just out last week that said that we are seeing a record number of Asian Americans who are looking to run. I forget which source this was in, maybe CNN and the New York Times, but look that up, see what that number is. They were talking about people in California, even my own representative here in Manhattan, where I live. There was a Korean American guy who started up and running, but he had never had any background whatsoever. But a lot of people have been motivated to run post 2016. So I think there are people there culturally, yes, model minority, myth or fact, someplace in the middle, depending on what we are. But I think there's a call for more bold leadership amongst all of us, and especially among Asian Americans, because a lot of us just want to, do our job, do it well. Hopefully we get recognized. But I'm here to say that for all of us here, we have to stop doing that and to advocate for ourselves and to stand up.
I also want to address the point about coverage. I created that coverage for the Times, and I did a lot of that work at CNN. But it can't just be one person. A lot of people understand that the way, or maybe don't understand that it's not, a journalist doesn't write something and then publish and goes on live. It goes through editors. And so where we have a lot of backlog is not just in hiring reporters of color, women, and other underrepresented groups. It's hiring editors of color, women, and underrepresented groups. The top management at the majority of the mainstream media companies that we all work for are heavily male, heavily white. How we expect that to tell a story about a changing and browner and blacker America is beyond me, and that's what we've been doing, and that's what I advocate to change.
Ron, in terms of diversity coverage, I think there's sometimes that executives are going to put themselves in harm's way if they speak, truth to power. But I think as journalists, you can also expose inequity through research. For the last 5 years, Black Enterprise has done a research project on board of directors and the lack of diversity there. And we found that Silicon Valley was among the most egregious. 5 years ago, Apple didn't have a black on its board. HP didn't have African Americans on its board. Facebook didn't have African Americans on its board. We decided to develop a project that was going to expose the lack of diversity across the S&P 500, and we identified those companies, including BlackRock. Today, Facebook has an African American on its board. Apple has an African American on its board. BlackRock has an African American on its board. So we can play a role in terms of putting a spotlight on.
Is it the same person?
Yeah. No, actually, that's a good question. No, it's different people. But you're right. That's the next challenge is also looking at, are you recycling the same board members? That's one, and then two, are you getting board members who are being proactive and making change?
Yeah, no.
So that's a part of it. And we work with, this shout out to Ron. The Executive Leadership Council has been very effective in getting the word out and helping us move the needle and helping to make those changes. So,
all right, we're down to just 2 minutes here. And did you finish your
yeah,
okay. I finished. And I just wanted to react also. I think sometimes we think we need to either have a fastball or a slow or a curveball. I think that the way we get the subtlety in is we put a nice playlist together. That's where we don't have to be either in your face or completely too subtle. Because that was your question, Ron, and it's about having a good set of plays. But if you're a pitcher, you know what I'm talking about. That's what you need to go into. So when you're hitting those situations, you got your right sizing. I think the reason why when you look at API communities and politics, and I know you like politicians better, is that, you know, one of my first jobs was a campaign manager when I was like 24 years old. And back in the day, we had something called the Rainbow Coalition. And that's when you sat on a table, it was a rainbow coalition. And in the towns, they worked together to hold up one person from that table. I think that modern day practitioners are forgetting that lesson of all the communities need to work together. APIs will not do this alone. African Americans will not do this alone. White Americans cannot do it alone. All of these groups need to work together. When you talk about APIs, I think it's often been, well, it's just going to be us, or just going to be the Chinese Americans, or the Japanese Americans, or the Vietnamese. You know, it's all. You know, just slice that pie into 49 pieces. That's what you get. So I think the Rainbow Coalition is a really interesting idea. When we're going to get more international news, unfortunately, it is going to be when there are catastrophes. I think a way to be better storytellers to bring in international storylines is to bring in international storylines in your story. So I could be talking about Detroit, Michigan. My example of an amazing city that Detroit is might be Leipzig, Germany, 30 years ago. So you can internationalize your local stories. And I think that's where we can, as storytellers, be more complex subtly in a good way. We're down to 13 seconds, Michael, but go ahead.
I got a quick question for you. This morning, we talked about the only way to change really diversity and inclusion in the corporate boardroom is to really have more diverse leaders up there. So talking about the media, now that we got Lester Holt kind of anchoring nightly news and Hoda kind of anchoring the Today Show.
They are anchoring, yes.
When are we going to have Richard Louis anchor the Tonight Show?
Right.
We'll all be very much 6 feet under when that happens. But thank you, Michael. I want to finish with something I call the lightning round. If you've ever sat on a panel with me, you're subjected to this. And it is a way to kind of encapsulate what we talked about today. I get to say as many words as I want. You can only say one. I say as many words as I want, only one. And do it quickly, please. I'll just point to you when I say this, okay? Journalism and media.
Amazing.
Use a microphone.
Amazing.
Okay, go ahead.
Yay.
Powerful.
Keeping the spotlight on gender and racial representation.
Necessary.
Critical.
Important.
Fake.
I don't like that one.
It's a lot of dashes.
You.
Shoes.
Gender.
Me.
Diversity.
Inclusive.
Supply, demand, or access.
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 Okay. President of the United States.
Is this off?
One word.
Trump for now.
Concern.
Problem.
Your brand.
I'm sorry?
Your brand.
Digital Latina.
To lead.
Uplifting African American.
Your story.
Diverse.
In one word?
Yes. The rules did not change. I'm sticking with it.
Okay.
Surprising.
Ongoing.
The new majority.
Powerful.
Here.
Necessary.
Amen. Thank you, all three. I appreciate it.